Welcome to my tutorial for Super Smash TV for Super Nintendo. This is going to be on a normal setting. You can play the game on easy as well, but it ends after the first stage, so it's pretty much worthless to play on that setting. You have to play on normal or higher to get the full game. I never liked when games do that, but normal is extremely difficult. It's one of the hardest games that I've played through on the channel to date. Probably only second to Gunsmoke Arcade. It took around 19 hours and 11 minutes to beat. And I did probably over-practice a lot of the bosses as I went for no-death runs on the bosses for the boss domination series on my channel, where I showcase boss playthroughs where I really dominated the boss fight. I make a playlist of that, so check that out if interested. And I pretty much went for no-death runs on all the bosses, so it was probably over-practice, but usually nerves kick in these games anyway, so I don't think it hurt to have the extra muscle memory. I recommend using save and load states to really practice each boss and make sure that you have it down, because you really don't want to drain lives on the boss fights. They're super fucking long fights for whatever reason. Even in the arcade, the boss fights aren't super long, but in this version, for some reason, are much, much longer. So, even small fuck-ups during the boss fight will add up, because before you know it, you've lost 5 lives on the boss, and that's, pretty much a whole continue. So, you only have 4 continues in the game, and they're 5 lives each. Depending on how lucky you get, you'll get a certain amount of 1-up drops, but it's very random, so I don't know any way to manipulate that. So, you're basically just hoping to get a decent amount of 1-up drops, but when it comes down to it, you really don't have a lot of lives to spare, since, the game is over an hour long. And, all those deaths add up, so you really need to learn the game. It's pretty much an endurance game, and it doesn't really let up. Definitely one of the more brutal games. Probably the most difficult. Well, one of the most difficult games on the Super Nintendo. Not the most difficult. I'm sure there's some harder games, but I think this is probably one of the hardest on the system. So yeah, my practice took me around 13 hours. 13 hours and 11 minutes of practice on the game. So what I did was I did a practice run of the game where I didn't even try to beat it initially. What I did was I just went through the game with save and load states, and I on an emulator, and I saved state on any parts that I thought might be troublesome in my full run. So I did about a 13-hour and 11-minute practice run of the game, and I was actually going to practice it a little bit more, but I ended up beating the game before I finished all my practice, because I made some full attempts in between before I finished my practice, just to mix things up, because it does get repetitive practicing the same shit for hours. So I like to mix it up. So yeah, I did it. So a lot of that practice was on the bosses. Most of it was on the bosses. I spent about 4 hours practicing the first boss because I wanted to get a no-death run on him. And once I got the no-death run, I stopped practicing and I moved on to the next, the rest of the game. So I pretty much did that with all the bosses. So it took, a very long time. One thing that didn't really click for me until I finally beat the game was managing the hordes in the rooms. Because, I didn't have really good strategies. I was mostly adapting. Corner fighting does work pretty well. Like if you get in a corner, as you see me doing here, and you shoot left to right. I'm not really doing it heavily at this point in the game, but you will see me do it a lot lately, where I get in a corner and I just change my firing direction while I'm just pinned down in that corner. And by hanging out in the corner, enemies can't spawn out of the corner, so you can kind of protect yourself there for a while and fight in the corner. But if you do that for too long, it gets very hard to survive later in the game, and you will get overrun very easily. So it's only a good strategy when you're desperate and you can't find a path to move through. You don't really want to stay in the corners for super long. Not most of the time. There are some exceptions to the rule. Like if you have an orb power up, which gives you an extra firing stream, then you can stay in the corner a lot safer and fight. Or if you have a spread shot or another power weapon, things like that. When you pick up this aiming icon here, see, it gives me a green circle under my feet, and that circle, it starts to fade until it becomes a red circle, and then it goes away. And what that does is that gives you invincibility while that circle is under your feet. What you want to do with that, as soon as you get that, start running into all the enemies to clear them out. It will kill them. Since you're invincible, it'll just kill the enemies. See, I wiped out all those enemies coming out of that door. You want to use that whenever possible to... don't use it for just invulnerability. Use it to run over the enemies. And the way I use it is I prioritize the hardest enemies in the room. So as soon as I get that, I'm running towards the hardest enemies in the room, and you can wipe them out instantly. So keep that in mind. That's going to just be, it's going to be all these little techniques and tactics that add up when you're doing these kind of endurance runs, because the game really doesn't let up. And this is really not going to be an approachable game for beginner or even intermediate players. It's going to be extremely brutal for intermediate players. And even for very good players, it's going to give a very big challenge, most likely. It's a very hard game. But there are going to be strategies. Like, I can't break down everything step by step, but I can give strategies that are going to work really well. But it's going to take a lot of practice to be able to implement them on the spot, because you don't have a lot of time to think in this game. Now, if you want, you can pause the game, and it will show, the enemies don't disappear when you pause the game. So if you wanted to, you could probably play super carefully by pausing the game whenever you get overwhelmed. You know what I mean? You could probably do that and make things a lot more manageable. I did that, I think, only a few times. Like, I was getting a little overwhelmed there. But, I mean, once I got into the roll with things, I didn't really do that too much. But that is an option. If you want to do that, you can do that. I didn't really want to play that way, so I tried to avoid that. So, yeah, these red guys that walk around the corner, see that guy on the right? Those two guys on the right side of the screen, those guys will walk around very slowly along the edge of the screen and then explode into shrapnel. Now, on this stage, the shrapnel matches the background of the stage, so it can be... the shrapnel can easily hit you if you're not paying attention to that. So just be aware of that. You either want to destroy them if you can, or just let them kill themselves by exploding and then just dodge the shrapnel. But just be aware of it. Already this is kind of a difficult room with tanks, shrapnel guys, and regular crowd type of enemies mobbing you. But eventually you're going to get the strategy down for all those different types of enemies, and you'll be able to put it all together. The first stage doesn't really give you a chance to learn it. It does start off a little difficult. For this guy, this is the guy that I spent 4 hours practicing to get a no-death run on. So this is the no-death run. What I did for this tutorial, I edited my best boss gameplay. I edited it on top of my actual successful run for beating the game. So all the rooms is from... all the gameplay you see in the actual rooms is from me actually beating the game on my successful attempt. But all the bosses is from my best attempts in my practice sessions. If you want to see my raw run, you can see my full run, all the fuck-ups where I barely beat the game. You can see that. And just search the name of the game on the channel. For this guy, the main thing to do is you want to learn how to run around him in circles while he's shooting lasers. The first thing you want to do is destroy the two gunners that are on his tread. So do that first. But then after you do that, you're going to run around in circles, and you got to get used to the pulse of his laser when he fires it. It's not super fast, but it's dangerous because sometimes he'll move really fast and corner you with it. So you just always have to be aware of the lasers that he's shooting and be constantly ready to move. Remember that he can only move diagonally very, very slightly. He can barely move diagonally. He can mostly only move left, right, up, and down. Also, at the very top of the screen up here is a safer area where he tends not to go as often, so you can drop a lot of shit on his head from up here. You want to use the lob bombs and try to drop those lob bombs on his head. The best place to hit him in these forms is right below his chin. There's usually a brown spot below his chin. You want to try to hit that. You get extra damage. It's kind of a glitch. But it's hard to hit. I don't always hit it, but if you can, you'll get more damage. It also seems that if you hit him between where his arms connect and right below his chin are the parts where you can do the most damage. I noticed that speedrunners do that, and I read strategies about that, but it was hard for me to pull off. I do try to hit those areas, but just keep that in mind, and you may get extra damage that way if you're able to hit it. But yeah, he's going to change multiple forms, and the only way to damage him is with power weapons. He will not take damage from your regular bullets at all. So the best is these lob bombs here, these yellow bombs. These are the best weapons to use on him. And you got to angle them so that they're, you know, hitting into him. And they'll kind of push him, they'll push him around a little bit as well. But he'll still move through it, as you see. He can still bust through and hit you, so you got to be very careful. This form is the easiest one because he has no lasers in this form. So you just shoot him and just stay away from him so he doesn't run you over. This is probably the trickiest of the forms because it's faster. But it's still the same strategy. Run circles around where you're shooting lasers and, you know, get the power weapons and hit them when you can. It's optional if you want to clear out these shrapnel guys walking around the arena because they will explode on their own, but you got to be very aware of when they explode. Pay attention to them because I have gotten deaths because I wasn't really focused on them. And when they explode, they shoot that shrapnel out that matches the background, so it's a little tricky. This is going to be another part where you just want to practice this for hours until you get it down. It's probably going to take hours of practice. But you got to expect that with a game like this because this is a very difficult game, so you're going to have to practice parts a lot. So yeah, you want to keep distance from this guy whenever you can because he can move very fast, especially his final form. You fight this boss again, but it's the game show host at the end of the game, and he has the same exact patterns. The problem with the last boss is that it's a much faster version of this. I don't know that if he actually shoots faster, but he drives around much, much faster, and it's very easy to get run over in that fight. But if you learn this fight and you spend hours practicing it, you're basically learning the final boss of the game as well. So it's a 2-for-1. It's worth putting in the time practicing and learning this boss. I would recommend practicing him until you can beat the entire boss without any deaths, but you don't have to take it that far. You could just play it until you only die like 1 or 2 times if you want. Just take into mind, you know, that nerves are probably going to play a role, and if you're more tense and nervous, you're not going to perform as well as you do in isolated save state practice where you can just keep loading the saves, you know, constantly. You just keep loading, and there's really no consequence. So it's always going to be harder in a full run to pull off. But if you die enough times and make enough attempts, you're going to have to practice this whole game anyway, but I do recommend isolated practice on certain parts like the bosses. Now for these guys, there's a trick that I like to do. Initially, I use the green grenades. I kind of just waste them up. They're like one of the worst weapons in the game because they're such short range. But now I have my regular little pistol here, and what I like to do is make sure you grab those 1-ups, the faces with the helmet on them. It looks like a black afro. Grab those because those will give you an extra life. So always try to get those if you can safely do so. Sometimes you can lose lives trying to grab. Now for this, go in the bottom corner here. And what I like to do is shoot mostly diagonal and manage these guys by bouncing them around. Always get that smart bomb to clear the room if you can get it. But what I like to do is I stay in the bottom left corner here mainly, and I shoot diagonally a lot of the time to bounce these guys around so they don't get around me. And I'm watching to see where their lasers are coming from because I don't want to get hit by those lasers. So if you stay in this corner, you can really bounce these guys and keep them off your ass if you really play reactively and really react to what's going on and just try to bounce them off of you. Whenever you see them approaching, you know, fire in that direction and just bounce them out of the way. And I found I could really, manipulate their movement by staying in the bottom corner. And I always do that whenever I see those enemies appear. I try to play it like that. If you try to get in the middle and deal with them all in the middle, it's very, very difficult, and it's very easy to get killed. So I recommend using my strategy for those type of guys. And remember, the strategies that I'm explaining, you're going to be applying them when multiple enemy types show up at the same time as well. You're just going to have to adapt in the moment, and you're going to have to be doing multiple strategies at once. That's where the game gets more difficult. But that's just part of learning the game. It will all come together if you play enough. You just have to practice. So, yeah, for these guys are a little bit of a faster variant of the regular mob type of guys that crowd you. These are like a faster variant. They float around, so sometimes they seem to like miss your bullets sometimes. They're a little bit more dangerous. But it's going to be similar to the other mob type of guys you've been fighting. You just want to try to clear out as many of them as you can. A good strategy that I like to use for these type of enemies, these mob enemies, they're like basically just generic enemies that run for you. You know, there's a few of these enemies in the game. They come in different looking, but they behave very similar. The basic strategy I like to use is to run around the room in a circle. It's a square-shaped room, but I like to run around to each of the walls in kind of a circular motion. And whenever I get to a doorway, I kind of arc over the doorway and then go back down to the wall again. See, I go over the doorway, then I go around to the wall again. And I try to do that in a circle. It's not always a clean, perfect circle, but it's, that's the general strategy that I use. Get these things too if you can. Remember, when you get this shield, it protects you somewhat, but enemies can get through it. And it does not allow you to move to the extreme edges of the screen because since it's circling, it causes a gap and you can't go all the way to the wall. So if you're not able to move all the wall to get a power-up, it's probably because you have that thing circling around you. Just be aware of that. It can get you killed if you don't expect that. But you'll learn. Also, I'm going to be detailing this exact route. This is a speedrun route I got off of a speedrunner. I'm going to put his name in the description as well as I'm going to post the exact route I took. You're going to want to take the route that I took because it's the shortest route in the game as far as I know. Because it's the world record speedrun route. So, I think it probably saved me about 6 or 7 minutes of having a fight. So, I mean, it does help taking the fastest route. So, I do recommend taking this exact route. And like I said, I'm going to list it in the description. So, I'm not going to explain it here because it's just too much to explain. And you're not going to remember it. You got to see it, written out. And then you can just follow it that way. Print it out on a piece of paper or something when you play the game. That's what I basically did. So, yeah, same thing here. Grab the 1-ups. These snakes can cause extra difficulty because they kind of corner you in when you're trying to deal with other guys. And you got these shrapnel guys and you got tanks. So you got a mix of hard enemies here, when it's all combined. So you're going to want to use that circular motion tactic to kind of, circle around these guys. But you're not going to be able to use the tactic where you circle around the entire room anymore because there's just too many enemies blocking your movement. So you're just going to have to kind of try to stay in the middle when you can and try to just narrow these guys, cut these guys down, cut their numbers down. And try to deal with the harder enemies first. Whenever you see a snake or a tank, kill that first if you can. Because those are the ones that are going to make it hard because the crowds are not that hard to deal with once you get used to them. What's hard to deal with is having all this other shit, fucking with you while you're trying to deal with the crowds. That makes it much, much harder. So you're going to want to deal with... Now when you're just dealing with the crowd, you can get into a rhythm with this and it's not too bad. But this is a light crowd. Later in the game, there's going to be heavy crowds, and you're really going to have your crowd tactics down by that point. Like I said, it didn't even click for me until my final attempt. I actually didn't beat the game until my 5th full attempt where I exhausted all my continues. I had partial attempts where I reset the game, but... Because if I didn't do well in the first stage, I decided, fuck it, I'm not going to keep playing because you shouldn't be fucking up that much on the first stage. You should be able to beat the first stage with at least 6 lives left over to carry into the next stage. So, I mean, I would recommend doing it that way. So, same strategy for this. Playing in the corner here and managing all these guys. This is the same swarm. It's probably more of them than it was before, but it's the same tactic. Anytime you see a tank or something like that, just, prioritize the tank. But aside from that, just stay in this corner and shove these guys around with your bullets. You see, I don't even go for the power-ups here. I go for a few of them that are close by, but I don't go to the other side and try to get the power-up because I know I can manage them with regular bullets by using that tactic. So, that's what I do. So now this room is difficult because this is a much faster version of these guys, and part of the room is cut off. So you don't have the full square to move around. There's a segment that's kind of cut off by that railing. So whenever you get invincibility, power-up, use it. And run over all the guys. You also get brief invincibility every time you die, but you don't want to get it that way. When you respawn, you'll have brief invincibility. But as far as getting gifts and getting points in this game, and money and silver bars and all that bullshit, don't bother getting any of that shit, because all it does is makes your score tally take longer after you beat a stage. But points don't give you any 1-ups at all in this game. So you're not going to get any extra lives through scoring. So anything that gives points, just avoid it. It's a waste of time, and it'll probably get you killed trying to grab it. And it just takes longer at the score tally, so it just irritates me. I don't like waiting around, so I just avoid that shit. Now, if you get the arrows that are on the ground, there's these little arrows. They give you a speed boost, and those are super, super useful in this game. Much like Gunsmoke, having the Gunsmoke for arcade, having the speed boost makes a huge difference in how you're able to run around the enemies and get out of situations. The speed only lasts for a certain amount of time. It's temporary, but it makes a big difference. And sometimes you'll get multiple of them in a row, and it'll keep it going. This is a similar strategy, but it's a hard room. But it's a similar strategy in running around in a circle and clearing out the guys and avoid, trying to arc around the doorways, because the guys will come out of the doorways and kill you instantly. So you want to arc around the doorways. Also, sometimes you'll notice that the enemies kind of come out in clumps. So the enemies will sometimes come out a certain number of them, and then there'll be a gap before the next enemies come out of the doorway. In that gap, it gives you time to run between and get through that doorway without having to arc over. But it's always a little dangerous to do it that way. These guys are very fucking annoying if you don't know to expect them. But all you really have to do is shoot at them in their direction while just running around to avoid them. Sometimes you want to make extreme movements, like a circular movement, to get away from them, because they will really corner you. So just be aware of them. I got used to dealing with them, so I didn't have to make as exaggerated movements. Once you get used to enemy patterns, you can play a lot tighter, and you don't have to make as extreme movements to dodge stuff. And that's when you start getting better at the game, I think. But see, now this orb that I have with me, that's the speed power-up I just got. But you see this orb I have with me, you can keep that for at least a full room. I don't think it carries over to the next room, but you can keep it for the full room. The way to keep that orb is to not let enemies touch it. I didn't realize that at first, but it'll stay with you until an enemy touches it or until you go to the next room. So what you want to do when you have this orb circling around you is try to keep a distance from the enemies, like staying in a corner, and just try to use that orb and just keep firing with that. Because you'll get that extra firepower, and you can get enemies, you can clear them out before they can get to you a lot of times if you stay away from them. See, I lost the orb very quickly. It's easy to lose. And see how easy it is to get overwhelmed. In my actual playthrough, I did extremely bad on the bosses. Even though I was able to no-death run them in practice, I ended up totally fucking up. The second boss can be really random, even if you learn it. And he ran me over probably like 5 or 6 times, draining my lives. It was fucking ridiculous. But it was just, that's the kind of shit that can happen in this game. It can be very unpredictable. There are certain things, that you can get down, and you can minimize certain things. But there's times when you're going to get bad luck, too. And I don't know that you can overcome that in all circumstances. I didn't find a way to counter that. If the boss decided to run me over a bunch of times, there really wasn't much I could do about it. The second boss. The second boss is the hardest part in the entire game. That took me around 5 hours to get a no-death on each form. I didn't actually get no-death on the full boss, but I was able to beat each form without dying. So I pretty much edited those 2 attempts together into one. So I wasn't able to get that in one clean take. But I did do each form without dying, which was very hard to do. But by that point, I learned the boss well, so I think it was worth doing. You're going to want to practice this game thorough just because how difficult it is. Most games when I use save state practice, I may beat a boss maybe 2 or 3 times in a row to make sure I have it down. But in this game, it's just so much harder than most games. You really want to make sure you have the boss down to where it's muscle memory and you don't have to think too much about it during the actual run. And that just comes with time and practice. It'll start to come down. So yeah, this is a secret room, and you're gonna find these secret rooms because they're gonna be in the path that I list in the description. So, like I said, print it out or write it down, and just follow the path that I list. It's not my path that I found. It was from a speedrunner. I'm gonna list his name. He actually had a very helpful fact that allowed me to understand how to fight this guy. Because I didn't understand how to damage this guy properly. Because if you don't do it right, you'll fight this guy forever and he'll never die. So there's things to understand about this, which I'm going to explain. So, immediately what you want to do is, you need to take out all the armor surrounding him. There's about 15 or 16 pieces of armor surrounding his head. What you need to do is you need to destroy each piece of armor completely. So you'll know it's completely destroyed by the way it looks visually, and also it won't flash anymore. That means that you destroyed a piece of armor. You need to destroy every piece of armor surrounding his head. So you can do it with regular bullets. Unlike the first boss, you can destroy the armor with regular bullets. Now, whenever you get this green weapon here, the grenades, it gives you temporary invincibility with the weapon, but that's only for this boss. It's very specific to this boss, the invincibility. Same with these lobber grenades. Anytime you pick up the lobber grenades, you're going to get a temporary invincibility. Now, the reason that's important is that means you can rush the boss aggressively and run into him without dying. And that allows you to get very close and take off those armor pieces in close range. You'll see as soon as I get that green grenade power up, the first thing I'm doing is getting close. Now, with the lobber grenades, I still keep my distance because they have an arc, and you need to get distance to be able to connect with them. But for the green grenades, I get right in there and I grind off those armor pieces because I'm not worried about getting hit because he can't hit me when I'm invincible. So now for the lobber grenades, you need a little distance like this. You can corner him and kind of get him to bounce around in the corner and keep him off of your ass, and he won't really be able to push through that most times. See, like this, you get him with the lob grenades and corner him like that, and he gets stuck. Now, I have temporary invincibility, but as soon as it wears off, I'm picking up the next power-up or the next lobber. So be ready to pick up the next power-up. You want to really chain those power-ups. Now, this is the second form. For this, there's about 5 or 6 armor pieces that you need to break off of him before you can destroy him. Now, once you destroy all armor pieces on either form, your goal is to strike the face directly, mostly with lobber bombs. That's the best way to do it. But I think any type of weapon will work once all the armor is destroyed. I think it will damage the face. Even your regular pistol will damage the face once all the armor is off. Sometimes this guy will have a weird glitch where his armor doesn't come off on the right side, it seems, and doesn't take damage or flash, but eventually it does seem to correct itself. I read about it in a fact, and I think I noticed that. Another thing you want to do is try to get those speed power-ups whenever you can for these bosses, especially, because he will corner you. Now, with this guy, you also need to keep in mind the stars that he shoots out. You want to be moving laterally in any direction to avoid those stars when they fire out. You need to get a feel for that. Now, when you have invincibility, you don't need to do that, obviously. But when you don't have invincibility and you're fighting him, you need to be moving either up or down, left or right. You need to be moving away, kind of vertically away from them. You don't want to be moving in line with them because they travel faster than you do, so they're going to outrun you. You want to be going in, either in a up or down or in a way away from them. Kind of hard to explain, but you got to get used to moving away as those shots are coming out. And once you get used to it, you can kind of feel the pulse of the boss when he fires, and you can dodge it easily to where you don't think about it much, and you can just concentrate on fighting the boss and bouncing him around. You want to use those power weapons to bounce that second boss around, because you can manipulate him by shooting him. You'll notice he bounces around. You can kind of bounce him in the corner. Only with certain weapons. You have to get used to that, though. It takes a lot of practice, but that's the best advice I can really give. I mean, you may have to practice that for like 5 hours or more like I did, so don't expect to be able to do it quickly just by watching a video. But yeah, once you get used to that boss, like I said, you'll be able to dodge it easily, but you still have to watch out because those shots that he fires, the skull form, the shots will bounce off the walls and hit you, so you got to watch out for the bounce as well. So here, they put a lot of these fucking landmines in the arenas, which can be a pain in the ass because it's the last thing you want to focus on, but obviously you can't step on that, so you got to avoid those. You can't destroy them unless you want to walk into them and commit suicide, so you don't want to do that. It starts you off with a lot of tanks, so you're basically going to want to just, avoid the bullets the best you can and try to take them out quick. The thing that makes these rooms a little tricky is that there's a lot of snakes that come out of these mouths on the top of the screen. And of course, the problem with those snakes is that they're going to flood the arena while you're trying to fight other shit. So you either need to try to clear them out and cut a path for yourself, or you just need to stay on the other side of the screen where the snakes are not coming out of. But you're going to be managing a lot of enemies at once. So now these snake type of enemies are pretty slow. They're really not hard. They're easy for crowd enemies, actually. They're slower for crowd enemies. They're the easier ones in the game, actually. But what makes these rooms challenging is that you got snakes, you got these large centipede enemies with multiple segments, and you got a bunch of different shit coming out. So that's what makes it hard. You really want to try to kill these little purple centipedes as fast as possible, because those are the enemies that cause me the most trouble, I notice. Because they can really corner you since they take a lot of hits to take down. And they kind of follow you. So you want to take them out. Of course, while managing all this other shit, you have to manage everything else on screen while you're doing that. And really, being able to survive is going to take a lot of practice. You see, even when I was playing, I died numerous times on this little room here. So it's it's going to be hard to do this game and not die at certain points. But you don't need to be perfect. Like I said, I beat it and I died a lot. My boss runs were pretty sloppy in the end, but the reason I was able to beat it was because I did a lot better on the rooms. I was able to, I was, especially at the end, I was able to only lose 2 lives on the final room before the last boss, which is a very, very long endurance fight. So I could have drained a lot of lives there. So there were areas where I saved a lot of lives. when you have an ability to shoot these shrapnel guys and get rid of them, it's worth doing, because they can always explode and catch you off guard, but they're usually not a priority because there's usually other shit you want to clear out first. I usually just let them explode and dodge the shrapnel because they'll die that way anyway. So yeah, they start you out with a bunch of little gifts here. But like I said, that just wastes your time in the score tally, unless you're going for a high score, but then you wouldn't really be using this as a tutorial if you were that good at the game. So yeah, this is another similar room. There's really not that much different about this room. The next boss we're going to be dealing with is going to be the snakes, the twin cobras. Always grab these 1-ups when you can do it. Even if it's a little dangerous, I usually go for them. Sometimes I end up losing lives trying to get the fucking 1-ups, which always sucks. Because then you've essentially lost 2 lives. You lost the life that you would have gained, and you lose your current life. So it's dangerous. But I usually like to try to get them, because the more lives that I can have banked, the better chance I have of surviving the full game, since it's pretty much, like I said, it's an intense endurance type of game. So this room is mostly going to be crowds of these slower snake type enemies. They're not really that fast, but it's still difficult because they can easily overwhelm you. You really got to keep an eye. You want to deal with those tanks, obviously, first thing. Grab any smart bombs to clear out the room. You always want to do that when you can. But yeah, I usually prioritize the tanks when I get a chance. I don't always have a chance to take them out right away, so I just keep an eye on them. You want to learn how to focus in these games, where you want to focus mainly on your character and your immediate surroundings of your character is what you want to mainly focus on. In your peripheral focus, in your blurry vision on the side of your eye, you want to be focused on other things like the tank moving around and the shrapnel and other things like that. You got to get a good sense of that stuff as well. But your main focus, it's a lot easier if you know how to focus in these games, and the main focus should be around your character and his immediate surroundings and trying to fight through that. But just be aware of the peripheral and the other things going on, definitely, because that's the kind of shit that catches you off guard and gets you killed. You got to always be a few steps ahead in this game to survive. You got to be thinking a few steps ahead. If you try to improvise when you get cornered, a lot of times you end up dead. So you really always want to kind of be thinking ahead of where you're going to move as much as possible. If you get these invincibilities, you can just run over the purple centipedes if you want and kill them instantly. See these little invincibility pickups? See, I can just go on the centipede. I could walk on it if I wanted to and kill it. I didn't do that, but I could have done that. It's easy either way. This is not a hard part. But it starts to get hard when all the enemies start rushing in with the various enemy types. It starts off very easy. If you can get these shields, anytime you can get these circling shields and the orb, both of those are extremely useful power-ups. Whenever there's a screen-clearing bomb, it's always good to wait until there's a decent amount of enemies on screen like this and then use it. Don't just use it for no reason, because it's not going to do anything if there's nothing on screen, obviously. And you can use bullets in this game to carve paths through large hordes of enemies. So, as I was saying before, you want to kind of cut through with your bullets. And you'll learn how to cut paths through the, not like that, obviously, but you'll learn how to cut a path through the enemies. And it allows you to move through them and to the other side so you don't get cornered. You'll eventually be able to do that fairly decently. But every time I do it, it's always a big risk. I don't like cutting through the enemies unless I really have to. I usually try to stay back and take them out from a corner. But I do fight in the middle a lot just because I got used to it. And it is difficult to just stay in the corner. It's very easy to get overwhelmed if you just hide in the corner. I didn't find it to be super effective to do all the time. But it is a strategy. One of the best strategies I found when there's a lot of enemies is usually, like I said, running around the arena in a circular type of motion, going around all 4 walls. And whenever you get to a door, arc over the door and go back to the wall again. That's a good technique, but the problem is with areas like this is there's too much shit here. There's snakes and all this other bullshit. So For this area, you know, I didn't find that technique to be good. That's why I got overwhelmed and I got killed a few times, because the snakes really interrupt the flow of how you can move. So you have to kind of just, you know, manage the best you can and try to protect yourself in the corners, or, you know, you don't want to stay in one area for too long, though. You still want to keep moving and try to protect yourself in a different area if you can, but don't try to stay in one area for too long. Use that invincibility to run over the enemies when you die, or get the invincibility power up. There is going to be the final room of the game before the final boss is going to be a room where that strategy is going to be very, very effective that I mentioned about running around in a circle in the room and arcing over the doorways. You'll see me using that heavily in that area, because the final room is all mob type of enemies. There's no variety of enemies. It's actually extremely fucking long and repetitive. It's a very irritating way to finish off the game, you know. But the game does have a lot of tedious and very difficult shit. Awesome game, though. It's a great game. I mean, there's some things that could be better, obviously, but it's a great game. But not very approachable for most players. You know, I could understand why it would be an intimidating game for people back then, and for many players. I don't think a large percentage of people probably completed this game from playing it. And I also never hear of it mentioned in the hardest games or hardest Super Nintendo games. And I think it should definitely be mentioned in those lists. I'm guessing it's because maybe a lot of people just didn't play it long enough, or dismissed it for whatever reason, but it's an extremely difficult game. So, I mean, if it takes you a long time, don't stress it. But like I said, it took me a little over 19 hours to beat. And like I said, I did over practice probably on the bosses, but still, I must have not over practiced that much, because I still got kind of fucked over on some of the bosses in my full attempt. You can check out my raw attempt and see how close I came to failing the attempt at the end. So check that out too if you're interested to see how a full attempt actually looks. Because like I said, this is a tutorial version. This is edited to demonstrate. So this is not indicative of the way that I played in my full run. This is very isolated practice and mastering the bosses in practice, but it's very different. You know, having a good run in practice is very different than doing it in the full run, because I can just keep reloading the state until I get a good run, obviously. So, while it is still very difficult to do no-death runs on the bosses in practice, it's still different than when you're in a full run, because so much can go wrong. The bosses also don't always behave the same way, like I said. The second boss can be extremely fucking erratic. Scarface, he can be extremely erratic and start running you over for no reason and just keep doing it. And you can't push him back, and there's really nothing you can do as far as I know. So you got to hope that you don't have a bad luck run with Scarface. But if you do, like I did, I had a very bad run-in with him on my actual run, and I still beat the game because I was able to pick up a decent amount of one-ups by luck, and also by, you know, putting myself in risky situations to try to grab them and being able to do so successfully. And also I was just doing so much better on the rooms. So, you know, that saved me a lot of lives. I also learned how to fight the snake boss, which I didn't know how to do on previous attempts. So I have a very good technique for this boss coming up. Very safe technique that makes him the easiest boss in the game. But it still carries risks with it. It's still dangerous, but I found a technique that I haven't seen shown anywhere else. And I'm going to illustrate that. I'll also explain alternate technique, but I'm not going to focus on that too much because I tried the alternate technique and it did not work well for me at all. So I'll mention it briefly, but I'm not going to go into too much about it. So yeah, for this, it's going to be similar. Like I said, we're using the same strategies we've been using on each enemy type. Like mastering each enemy type gives you an idea of what to expect from them. Then you have to put it all together when they're all in the same room. That's where the game gets hard, and you get overwhelmed with the density and amount of shit on screen. You know, I think beating Gunsmoke for arcade made this game feel a lot more fucking relaxing than it would have been. Not that I was relaxed, but compared to Gunsmoke, you know, it's almost like taking a breather because that game is so fucking ridiculous for arcade. Check out my tutorial on that one if you want to see a really fucking extreme game. The hardest game on my channel, I think, by far. But this would probably be second to that in a lot of ways. But Gunsmoke has a large lead. Gunsmoke took about 25 hours, but it's still a lot harder because Gunsmoke is only about half the length of this. And it took 25 hours, so, you know, it took longer than this, and it's only half the length. And also, it's a game with checkpoints. So it's not a game where you have to start over and replay the whole game. So that was doing it checkpoint to checkpoint. And the checkpoints are only maybe a minute and a half long. So for it to take 25 hours, it's fucking extreme. There was one checkpoint that's only about a minute long, and it took over 9 hours to beat. So, you know, about half as long as this whole game took me to beat. So, you know, that game really, that puts into perspective how insane that game was. I think I did a pretty good tutorial on it, so check that out if you like this kind of shit. I'm probably going to feature this game on my featured video now for a little while, just to get it some views. I mean, this was a fucking hard one. So yeah, use that invincibility to take out these centipedes. Use your spread shot and weapons like that whenever you can to take out the centipedes first, because the centipedes are going to be the ones, you know, unless you're cornered, then you have to take out the small enemies. But really try to get those centipedes out first. Prioritize them, because they're going to chase you around and make shit really, really fucked up for a while until you kill them. But you just got to be super aware of what's going on. These red things, these red balls that chase you are very, very dangerous. Reason being is because a lot of times they come out of a doorway when you're not thinking about them, and they just run you over and kill you. You know, if you know they're coming, they're easy enough to deal with, but not when you're dealing with all this other shit. You know what I mean? You got a lot of other shit you got to deal with. You got shrapnel coming out from these exploding guys. You got the crowds, centipedes, all this bullshit's going on here. So you really gotta really keep on top of it. You got to be fast at prioritizing the main threats. You want to take out the enemies that are going to be the most troublesome first. That's probably my best overall advice, but there are strategies, like I said, that, like the circling strategy, and there are strategies that you're going to be able to use. Fighting in corners, chaining power-ups together, like grabbing power-ups whenever you can, is really, really useful because it keeps you in the fight. It keeps you on the strong end of the fight. Because once you get down to your pistol again, or your machine gun, you know, your base weapon, you're always at a big disadvantage, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed. So try to grab those power-ups whenever you can. If you have temporary invincibility, use it to grab the next power-up. Like I said, don't worry about grabbing cash and gold bars because it does nothing for you beating the game. There's also a pleasure dome, which is an alternative ending, basically, where you get some women for points. Now, I didn't do that at all. But what you have to do to get that is you have to go in these secret rooms and grab, I think, 5 question marks. And then you have to get a certain number of keys, which appear as power-ups throughout the game. You can just grab them. But, I mean, unless you're going for, like, that particular ending, I recommend not doing that at all, because what are you going to do with points? All you're going to do is get extra points. You don't get any 1-ups in the Pleasure Dome, so not on this version of the game. You may in other versions, but not on this version. Now, I have a strategy for these snakes. It probably took me a little bit over 3 hours to learn these snakes, and I came up with my own strategy because what I was watching online wasn't helping me. So what I do is I stay on the bottom of the screen, and I don't venture far out to grab power-ups. I mainly stay at the very bottom of the screen. Anytime you go out to grab a power-up at all, you're putting yourself at an increased risk because the buzzsaws, they spawn right out of this, where the snakes come out of. The hole that the snake comes out of is where the buzzsaws will spawn out. And the buzzsaws will just cut you up immediately. Your bullets, I think, can destroy them, but not immediately. So a lot of times they will hit me. So I don't even try to shoot at the buzzsaws. What I do is I stay at the very bottom of the screen. I mostly use my little pea shooter here. And it takes a little bit under 3 minutes if you do it this way. So it's not a super long fight. You just got to pay attention and just move left to right. You're mainly going to be moving left to right. And the other thing to learn with these snakes is that you can manipulate their movement by shooting them in the head. That's the biggest thing that I learned, and that's what really took me a while to learn, that I could really use that to my advantage. So what I do here, if you can get that extra little orb, use it. It does extra damage, and you can push the snakes better with more bullets. But see, when they come in to try to bite me, I shoot at them to the right, and it pushes them away, and then eventually they leave. So you want to push those heads out of your way. If you see that snake head coming down and try to get you, shoot at it and push it back. And you're going to be mainly focusing on just moving left to right. That's really the only thing you have to focus on, because the less you have to focus on, the easier it makes. Instead of trying to run around the snakes and do all this complicated shit, you're going to make things harder on yourself by doing that. So this very easy method, you can beat the snakes fairly easily without even losing a life. which I do in this video, but actually in my actual run I got sloppy and died twice. But, you know, if you play it well, you don't have to die at all. It's reasonable to beat this without losing a life. It's really not that hard to do. But you're mainly going to be moving left to right. Watch where the buzzsaws move and bounce and avoid them, as well as the lasers that the snakes spit down. The lasers are the main threat because the lasers, you know, can come down when you don't expect them. So when you see the snake head stop in the air, it's going to shoot a laser down. So just keep moving. Don't be in line with the lasers. That's all. It's probably the buzzsaws that are the most dangerous, but occasionally what happens is the snakeheads do not follow the rules at all, and they will just push through your bullets. They don't give a fuck. They'll barrel through your bullets and just kill you. So, you know, if you see the snakehead and you see that your bullets are not affecting the snakehead, it means that it's probably going to be pushing through. If it's going through pretty aggressively, you want to start backing off and prepare for that. And, you know, maybe even... I had to split the recording, so there's a little bit of an interruption. But, yeah, what I was saying is that sometimes the snakeheads will push through your bullets, and if you see that happening, you may have to go up in the top part of the arena and circle around so they don't bite you, because you have to get away from them if they push through your bullets. So if that does happen, keep in mind that for the snakes, the top half of the arena is completely safe from the snakes either hitting into you or shooting you with the lasers. It's completely safe from that, but it's not safe from all the buzzsaws that are up there. The problem with the upper part of the arena is the upper half above the snakes, above the hole where the snakes come out, is pretty much safe. But it's not safe from the buzzsaws. And the problem is you can't see the buzzsaws often because the snake's body will obscure your view of the buzzsaws. So the problem with that is, you know, you can still attack the snakes from up there and grab the power-ups, but it's very dangerous because of those buzzsaws bouncing around. I heard other people say that that's a safe way to fight the snakes, but for me, I ended up losing too many lives by doing it that way. So that's why I said I'm not going to really speak too much on that method, but it is important to know that that's a safe area from the snake's body because you may have to go up there sometimes to avoid the snakeheads. If they push through your bullets too aggressively, then you have to back off. Most of the time you want to try to push the snakehead with your bullets and push it away from you. And just stay on that bottom part of the screen. You should be able to beat the boss without leaving the bottom of the screen too much. I also learned, by learning that technique that I just identified, I actually was able to play the snakes very aggressive and run circles around them by pushing their heads around and manipulating their movement that way and running around in circles and grabbing all the power weapons and, you know, playing very aggressively. But the problem was I would still lose 1 or 2 lives. And I could do a no-death run really aggressively if I wanted to, but I don't think that's really that useful for the tutorial because I would rather show a safe method for fighting the snakes that's reliable. And I think that's the safest way that I found to do it. Because you're not going to want to be wasting lives by fucking around trying to be aggressive on the snakes for no reason if you don't need to get in close and put yourself in a risky scenario. So yeah, for this is like the semi-final room. This is a part where you're going to be fighting these things again. It's the same strategy of pushing these things around and staying in that bottom left corner, like I said, with these guys. Of course, while you're doing that, make sure you get rid of all the other enemies and shit too and be aware of them. But the main threat you're dealing with is going to be these laser guys, which you basically dealt with in several other rooms already on this path. So these are not going to be new at this point, but you're going to want to stay in that bottom left corner and just kind of herd them in a different direction by shooting them and moving them around. Get them off of you. It's a very easy strategy I found. I found it very easy to do it this way. It's one of those, one of the few areas where corner fighting works really well, staying in a corner and just changing your firing direction. It doesn't always work great with the hordes. I mean, it works for a little while, but with these guys, you can use it for the entire room. So, I mean, it works great on these guys. I think it's the best strategy. Once this clicked for me, I stopped dying on this part because I used to lose a lot of lives on these guys. And, you know, sometimes I get a little adventurous and move out in the middle of the screen, but I try to minimize my risks. I try to play it as safe as I could because I didn't even think I was going to beat the game on this attempt, you know, because I didn't even finish my practice on the final boss or the semi-final room, but it just clicked for me and I was able to beat the game, so that was good. Like I said, if you learn the first boss, then you've also learned the final boss. It's just a faster version. So practice that first boss a lot. It's really worth putting in the time. The hardest part of this game is going to be learning that second fucking boss. If you can learn that, then you're on your way to beating the game. You just got to tune up some shit, learn how to deal with the rooms. But put in that time on that second boss. You know, look at it like this, like beating that second boss is a huge part of actually beating the game. Even though it only took me maybe 5 of the 19 hours that I spent on the game, still, it was the hardest part of the game. So, it's also an area where you don't want to lose a lot of lives because you can drain so many lives on that boss. It can be a very long fight. But I explained how to damage it. Keep in mind that for that second boss, you have to remove all the armor before you can start targeting the face and actually kill it. You can damage the face while it has armor that's still intact, but the thing is you can't finish it off. So even if you damage the face immensely, you're not going to get the finishing hit until you've taken off all the armor. It's a little bit weird to explain, but I mean that's how it seems to work. But I try to cover, as much detail as I can get out in these tutorials. I made notes. That's why I was reading off of notes a few times. But I covered everything in my notes, and everything else is kind of just, practicing and getting a feel for the flow of enemies and how the enemies flow and how to best deal with it. It's a lot of muscle memory, but this game is very heavily adaptation, and I wouldn't really call it much of a memorization type of game unless you're maybe a speedrunner, because the speedrunners beat this shit in like half the time almost. So, I'm sure they have a way to really take these enemies out fast. I'm guessing they know exactly what's coming out. And that comes with playing the game for hundreds and hundreds of hours, I'm assuming. But, my tutorials are really just to beat games, so this is just to beat it. Be aware of these red bouncing balls, obviously, in whatever rooms they appear. They always appear in the same rooms. The enemies that appear are always the same. There's no differences. If you've done a room once, then once you know what's coming up. I didn't actually memorize what was coming out. I just kind of honestly just improvise in the moment. But you learn certain things like don't get too close to the doorways, things like that, and all those little things that you learn. You put it all together eventually as you play more. So eventually, everything will come together more fluently. But yeah, don't expect to have it down quickly because the rooms are the hardest part of the game, really. Because there's so many of them. That's the bulk of the game. And, you can't be losing, too many lives here and there because it really adds up. So yeah, this is actually the final room of the game. It has been for a while. And mostly what this room is, it's just hordes of these little generic enemies that rush towards you. That's all it is, pretty much. A few exploding shrapnel guys, but it's mostly just these guys that run at you. And this goes on for a really long fucking time. It may go on for like 10 minutes or something. It's a ridiculously long room. Which I think is kind of a lazy and cheap way to drain the player's lives for no reason, but there's also no 1-ups or anything after the snake fight. There's no 1-up drops that I've ever seen. So the game really wants to try to finish you off here by just throwing hordes of enemies at you for like 10 minutes straight. Or whatever it is. And it's pretty cheap. It feels like, kind of a cheap way to end the game. But keep in mind, this does originate from an arcade game. It's a port of an arcade game. And I did a playthrough of the arcade game recently, a blind playthrough. And it was a sloppy playthrough, but that game, of course, is even more wild and more difficult than this. But one interesting thing about the arcade version is that the bosses die much, much faster. They don't take like minutes and minutes to kill like they do in this game, which is an odd decision why they decided to make these enemies super bullet spongy in the Super Nintendo version. But the thing with the arcade bosses is that they're much more aggressive and much faster, and they run you over so much easier. So in a way, it makes them in some ways possibly harder, but I didn't practice them enough to get them down. They may be easier once you learn them because they don't take as long to die, but I just didn't practice them, so I couldn't say. But that was my initial impression. I think this is the overall best port to work on and try to beat. Because it has limited continues. The arcade version has unlimited continues. You just pay to win. So you have to make your own rules like, use this many credits or that many credits. But the game doesn't force any rules on you. It's really meant to take your money. And the Super Nintendo version is really no different. It's just a port of that game. And it's very similar. So the game is going to be pretty merciless, and it's going to be like a coin stealing type of game, in the arcade. It's going to be similar to that. But except this time you only have limited continues to beat it. That's what makes it so hard. But yeah, I think I ended up only dying 2 times on this room in this attempt. This was part of my full attempt that was successful, but it's a very fucking hard room just because it goes on for so long. I mean, you do get patterns down, but it gets very, very intense because you're getting cornered all the time, and it's just a very intense, room. It's difficult. It's really an endurance. You see, it's still going on, and it goes on for quite a while. It still has a lot more time left. It just keeps going. Like I said, I think it's kind of a cheap way to end it, but it is an arcade game, so it kind of makes sense. So yeah, this is the part where I was saying where that strategy of running around the room in a circle works the best. Because it's mostly all crowd type of enemies. There's really no variety here. You'll get the occasional shrapnel guy that appears, but for the most part, and you do have to watch out for the mines, so the mines do kind of fuck up your movement a little bit. You always have to be aware of them. It's easy to walk into them, but there's not too many of them, luckily. But the main thing here is just to walk around the room basically in a circle if you can, and just arc over the doorways, because you don't want to get run over in the doorways. So always go in an arc over the doorways when you get to them. But you want to kind of run around in kind of a circular motion. Now sometimes it may not be a full circle, obviously. I'm not just going to run around in circles the whole time, but you may be doing a half circle and then go back and retreat. Sometimes you want to do some corner fighting like you see me doing here. So you want to mix up strategies. There's usually not one strategy that you can just spam in this game. It's not the kind of game where you can exploit it easily and just spam a single strategy and just, destroy the fucking game. It's really not a game like that. It's a game where you have to learn multiple strategies and you have to be able to pull them off in the heat of the moment. At any given time, you have to be able to switch into a different strategy. So you have to learn how to really manipulate and switch strategies. I guess you can say the only real shortcuts in this game, as far as beating it, is that there is a shorter path. I didn't test to see if the shorter path actually has harder rooms or anything. So I'm guessing it's easier to take the shorter path, but it may have harder rooms. I didn't test that. So when I did my practice run, actually, I practiced rooms that I didn't even need to because they weren't even in my final path that I ended up taking. And again, I'm going to show that path in the description, so check out the description of the video. So yeah, this is the final boss. This is exactly the same as the first boss, except much faster driving. He seems to shoot his lasers at about the same fire rate. But the thing is, he's going to drive around much faster, and it makes it a lot easier to get run over. So with this guy, I'm going to recommend probably even playing it more careful than what you see me doing in this video. Because in this video, what I did was I made a save state on each form change of the boss. Because I didn't want to do another full no-death run again. Since I already did it on the first boss, I didn't feel like spending hours trying to get a no-death run again. The reason it would take so long to get is because it's very easy. Since these fights take several minutes, it's very easy to get run over or hit by something, really basic, really stupid, and then you got to start the fight over. So I didn't want to do all that since this tutorial is just a demonstrative. It's just to demonstrate. So it's not trying to show off and say, look what I fucking did. It's just to show an optimal way to play the bosses. I do like to try to get cool footage for the tutorial because I think it shows the mastery of the boss when you can really pull something off. And I like to show that kind of shit. But it's not always... Sometimes when I post that kind of shit, it's not always the best shit to put into a tutorial. So I guess my playthroughs are often a mix of the best things the best things that I ended up doing. And I try to break it down. I don't usually, I don't really go out of my way to try to do things in an easier way just for a tutorial. The reason I did the snakes in a really safe and easy method was because that's what I actually wanted to do in my full run, because I didn't want to take a risk of draining lives. I really needed all the lives I could get, especially before I got good at the rooms. It took me a while for the rooms to click for me, so. Not much to explain here. This is exactly the same thing as the first boss, so, check my explanation of the first boss and you're going to get the exact same strategy. The only difference here is you're going to want to keep a little bit more distance from this guy just because he moves so much faster, but he still can't move diagonally very well. He can only move very slightly diagonal. Their main movements are going to be left, right, up, and down on these two bosses. I pretty much consider them the same boss, even though they reskinned it and put a game show host face on it, but it's the same shit, just faster. Doesn't take any more hits from what I can tell. It seems to take the same amount of ridiculous hits. These bosses take a shitload of hits. When I first fought this boss, the first boss version, you know, it was tough because it just felt like it never died and took so many fucking hits. But once I got faster with circling around it and attacking it, it did start to become more natural. It came into my muscle memory, and it wasn't an intense fight really anymore. But I could still fuck up on stupid shit like getting cornered and lasered or run over. Sometimes I get too aggressive, and I get real close to the boss, and you know he'll just run me over. So it is a risk. You want to pick up those foot speed power-ups, especially for this boss if you can get them, because the faster you can move, the more distance you can keep from the boss. This is the easiest form since there's no guns, you know, no lasers. But the problem with this form is he drives around very, very fast. So when you try to get close, it's very easy to get run over. So you got to be aware of that. See, he makes very fast movements sometimes, and it can catch you off guard. These bosses can be random sometimes, where they just drive super fast for no apparent reason. So it can be unpredictable. Even when I practiced, I'd still get run over by the boss. But you know, the lob grenades are usually the best way to deal with them. But whatever you have available, any power weapon will work on this guy. So for the final form, he's going to be at his fastest. And, you know, he's going to be even faster now on the final boss version. But if you stay at the very top of the screen, a lot of times you can shoot down at him from below pretty safely. Because a lot of times he'll stay in the bottom half of the screen. But not now, obviously. When he moves all the way up, then you want to move back down to the bottom half. You know, you want to keep a nice gap between you and him. And don't get aggressive with grabbing power weapons if you can't grab them safely. Because remember, I was playing more aggressive in this playthrough because this was a safe state playthrough. But in my actual run, I was usually playing safer because, you know, I didn't want to do crazy wild-looking strategies because it just wasn't safe. And I wanted to try to conserve as many lives as possible. So take your time. Don't grab the power weapons if it's in a dangerous area. But yeah, after that, I would say that after you end up completing this game, I'd say that you've beat one of the hardest games on the system. Even though it doesn't really get mentioned in hardest game list, I would consider it so. I mean, I've played through maybe, I might be at like 140 Super Nintendo games or something like that. And I've beaten Jim Power for Super Nintendo, which is probably another one of the hardest games on the system. Certain games like Hagane, I didn't find to be that difficult. I mean, they have hard parts, but a lot of these games get overrated as far as I'm concerned. Like Contra 3, I didn't find to be that hard. I think a lot of these games are moderate, and they, you know, are upper moderate or moderate difficulty, and they get rated as being the hardest games ever and all this shit. Super Ghouls and Ghosts was only really hard because at the end you have to use this shitty bracelet weapon on the final two forms of the boss. So that's a huge pain in the ass. But aside from that, I didn't find that game to be too difficult. I mean, like I said, I have a lot of experience playing through shit, but I have a pretty good idea of what games I would consider to be of the upper limit of difficulty, and I consider this to be definitely one of the hardest, most extreme games on the system. Not really taking into account games with shitty control and games that play bad. You know, those games can be the hardest games of all time because they just play so fucking bad. You know, some games are just so fucking bad. But this is a game that has incredibly tight control, and it's extremely good. So, I mean, it's a legit difficulty. It's just a very difficult game. But it's a very satisfying one to beat. I recommend trying to beat it. And hopefully this tutorial will break down some of the details and save you some hours of practice. It's still going to take, you know, expect to spend hours and hours of practice even with these tips. But I think it should cut down on the overall time. If I knew about the snake heads, you know, that shooting them in the head to manipulate their movement was that helpful, I would have really been doing that the whole time. But it took me a few hours for that to click. So yeah, here you're going to get just a regular ending. If you get the Pleasure Dome, you will get probably some kind of extra ending or some bullshit, but like I said, I never care about good and bad endings as long as I'm playing through the full game. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.